In today's episode, we meet with Penton to discuss connections between literary themes and gaming and how the human experience takes the center stage for great content.
Alex is the director of the honors program at Missouri State University and a content creator for GamersWaypoint, a startup that takes a unique approach to game-related content.
You're listening to the Meaningful Content Mixer. I'm Bonnie, a content professional focused on pre-sales and product marketing.
And I'm Sarah, a content professional focused on post-sale knowledge management. Together, we like to explore what it takes to create meaningful content that is purposeful, demand-driven, and contextually relevant.
We are sharing strategies, tactics, and stories that help content professionals across disciplines create more meaningful content that drives successful outcomes for their customers.
Let's get started.
Great to see you today.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Alex. We're really excited to talk to you today. One of the principles that we have as part of this project is really seeking inspiration in unexpected places. And you are someone who, you've created all types of different types of content. And more recently, you've been creating content around game reviews. And what I found when I've been reading your reviews is that your content really follows kind of what we've been talking about is this storytelling approach or this narrative approach to content. And while the subject matter is gaming, I thought that, based on the way that you're creating content, I'd love to learn if there are things that we could take away that maybe we can apply to different types of content, but also just get a little bit of an understanding of what goes into creating that type of content, where you find your influences, and really what goes behind the scenes in that.
Yeah, I started thinking about writing for video games when I was in grad school, actually, because back then I saw instructors talking about film. I saw an instructor start a graphic novel course, and I never saw anything about video games. And so whenever I, graduated, that was something I always wanted to do. Because whenever you look at video game reviews, I don't know, throughout most of the time video games have been around, they've all been like 9 out of 10. This is what we like about it. Is this game good? Is it bad? And there's really, I thought that was, I don't know, really kind of shallow to explore art in that way. And so I was looking for opportunities to finally start taking what I was writing about literature in grad school and start applying it to video games. That was a little bit harder because video games are so, they're not completely linear like reading a book. There's different choices people can make, different ways that people can experience the game. And so I just looked for opportunities to be able to apply themes that were consistent across gameplay, and then discuss those. Whenever I got my first opportunity to start writing about video games, there was a man named Mark, and he said, whatever you do, we don't really want us to write about whether or not a game is good or not, because that is just subjective. Instead, try to figure out what the game is attempting to do, and then discuss how successful it is at its attempts at doing that. So every game will have, different ideas, and they don't all have to meet the same standards to be considered good. And so luckily that first company I was working with gave me the opportunity to just discuss what I thought the writers and developers were trying to express to their audience. So.
Do you think that the gaming industry or what players look for from game review content has changed in a way that enables you to create content in this way?
I think so. So like in the past, you would have some narrative games pop up. They wouldn't necessarily be the most popular games, and they didn't have the biggest budget behind them, right? So they were lower budget. And it seemed like the gaming industry was trying to create games that they thought people wanted. And I think that's where you have this like period in gaming history where it is all just first-person shooters and competitive games for a while, especially after online became such an integral part of gaming. But then, someone took some chances on some narrative gaming, and I think one of the first games I can remember seeing this chance was in The Last of Us, the first one, right, where it didn't seem like this was going to be a game that everybody was playing, but the narrative was so compelling that it created this giant fan base. And it seemed like companies, I think almost specifically Sony, started to recognize that you could dump a lot of money into these games and possibly you're either going to get your money back or you're going to attract more gamers to your brand. And that kind of snowballed. So over the course of this last generation of consoles, we just see blockbuster after blockbuster, very expensive games from God of War, Spider-Man, and then we had Red Dead, and we had Horizon Zero Dawn, and then Last of Us 2 and Death Stranding. And it was just these big blockbusters, but they had so much money behind them. And it has raised some new questions for these companies, whether or not they're putting so much money into it that they're either going to have to raise prices of games or start reducing the amount of these big blockbuster games. But I'm starting to think that some of these past games that have just came out, like Ghost of Tsushima, are showing that it's actually it is a money maker in themselves. Just the game itself is recapturing that money.
One of the trends that I'm seeing a lot in just tech in general, or with people in general, is this desire for better experiences. And so in what you just described with video games and the experience going from simple entertainment to full-on storytelling, journeys, having your own choice, we also see that outside of gaming as well. And so we were just talking last week about choose your own adventure with content. And so whether it's marketing content that is, case studies and webinars, and people are choosing their own adventure on where to go next. We see this in gaming, and it's like this trend where people just want good experiences when they're engaging in content, and no matter what kind of content that is. And I see, when you're talking about the gaming changes, and also in game reviews, so going from just the high level, this is what we like, this is what we don't like, to your approach, which is really engaging in the experience that people want to have when they're playing these games, and describing the experience so that they can relate to that.
Yeah. And I think the experience that people want to have with video games, at least there's portions of them, it's not just to shut life off. And I think that was a big mistake earlier on in video games, is this idea that this was just a hobby to kind of forget today's stress. And these narrative games that are coming out, they don't make you forget stress. They actually try to tear open what sometimes the human experience is in its darkest ways, what challenges just existence has for individual human beings, and the ethical crises that we have, and to explore the human condition. And that's not always the funnest thing to do. In fact, normally it's not that fun to do, but it is something that human beings we do feel attracted to, because then it helps us understand that we're not alone inside of that exploration, basically. And so that's really prompted some dark video games, but also video games that allow a complexity of humanity to be shown.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give some examples? You mentioned sort of seeing connections or wanting to write about games in a way that you were writing in grad school, or exploring literary themes. Can you share a couple examples of what you uncovered?
Yeah, so and the reason why I always thought that this was there within video games was my first experience with a narrative game whenever I was real young, with Final Fantasy VII, where you see eco-terrorists and they are trying to change how the corporation style on their planet Rex, that in the Shinra company, they are just absorbing the Earth's energy and it's making the Earth die, and it makes people come to action. And that was the first time where I started to see these themes, and I was young then, real young, of this kind of conflict that was occurring between people who were having to endure what other people were doing in order to make profit. And that opened up some ideas, and that was, again, a long time ago. Then finally, after I get out of grad school, and I've learned about critical theory. That was one of my major focuses in grad school, is critical theory. And what was it? I forget when Death Stranding came out. I think it was last year, maybe. I wasn't interested in that game at all. And then I started to read a lot of mixed reviews, like bad reviews. And I started to check the game out, and I saw this new technology involved with it and just what it looked like what is that actor's name? He's Daryl from The Walking Dead. I'm not sure.
Oh, I forgot his name.
Yeah, and he's in, Boondock Saints and all that kind of good stuff. And I was like watching what they were doing with him, this new technology that they were demonstrating. Kojima Studios was demonstrating after he left. I think it was, what did he leave? Konami, maybe? And anyway, so I pick it up, I start playing it, and, you're just delivering packages across this kind of post-apocalyptic landscape. And that's, at its base, that's basically all it is. It's not made for a combat game. It's you balance packages and you walk a long ways over, old terrain. But then it showed that he started to explore some really interesting themes where concepts, what started to pop in my head were the Freudian themes of, I think it's called Thanatos and Eros. So our death drive and our drive for a type of love, not romantic love, but to procreate or to create, basically. And you start to uncover that humanity's extinction was very much based upon itself, and that we were driving ourselves to extinction. I think Freud calls, war is basically a mass suicide that occurs inside of the human species in order to meet this odd drive that we have. But then I started to see that it wasn't just this bleak understanding of human self-destruction, but this person who had kind of accepted this extinction that was going on and then gets involved in a package delivery system that seems simple, it's just mail, but it is this effort to start connecting communities. And it brought on these themes that I found in my readings about existentialism. This despair that happens to individuals because they have to carry this weight of their possible non-existence in the future. And what Kojima did was take this existential kind of individualist concept and then bring it to a species level, right? Where humanity is now considering, is there any point? Because now this is going to be spoilers, so whoever is afraid of spoilers, you might not want to listen. But at the end, you kind of figure out that humanity was always going to be destroyed, that the whole concept of the universe was nothingness, and that the act of creation that occurred was an anomaly. And so the universe is always trying to correct itself back to extinction. And as the protagonist learns this, and he's been carrying around this baby the entire time, he learns that it's always going to end up that way. And so he is faced with this real existential choice, not about his own destruction, but realizing that it is all without purpose, then still makes the decision to go forward and start reconnecting everything at the end. And it was just these themes that were so heavy to really think about, that inside of a universe cycle, all life in different moments comes to an end. And so what do we do with our time if we realize that truth? You can just succumb to it, or you can exhibit this interesting type of courage that in spite of that nothingness, we continue forward. And that's kind of this interesting part about life itself, that it continues understanding this really disturbing future of itself. Which then makes it beautiful. And then as a player, I'm sitting there connecting this to my own kind of individual existence and, you know, our fears and anxieties. And so Kojima did a great job at not just presenting this dark kind of future, but representing, you know, what it means to be human in the face of that dark future. So yeah, in that paper I got to write about a lot of different themes, Thanatos and Eros and existentialism, and talk about how they could combine. And it was interesting to combine Freudian concepts with existential concepts.
Yeah, interesting. And it sounds like your take on that game was quite different from what else you were seeing. Did you get any feedback about that?
Yes. Yeah, so a lot of what was interesting, that was my first review actually that I was able to write. And it was super long, right? It was way long. I mean, that was like an academic paper. I forget how many words it was. It was like 3,000 words or 4,000, something like that. And people read this and they're like, you know, I was on the fence, but I'm actually really interested in trying this out, or I'm really interested in watching you stream. And that's kind of another part that I add into my reviews, because a lot of times I stream narrative games that I'm going to review. And then I can get what other people are experiencing as well. And I can include that into those reviews. But people responded well. Yeah, and that's what kind of, you know, I think as an academic, or really anybody, you always have this kind of self-esteem issue, right? You know, is the work that I'm producing actually good enough? And so whenever you start getting feedback, and it doesn't have to be feedback like, oh, that's a great review, but a feedback like, you know, I never thought about this before. And to me, I don't need feedback about how great, you know, my writing is or how bad it is. I just want to elicit a question. And to me, that's good enough.
Yeah. I appreciate the perspective. Sounds like you were successful in that one for sure.
Yeah.
Another piece of content that I saw, and this came out of the gaming startup that you work for. What is that called again?
Yeah. So, you know, we started a new kind of gaming entertainment journalist site that's based out in the UK, GamersWaypoint. And what's great is that they have allowed, you know, their kind of mission statement is write what you want to write. And so even though, you know, we have, what is it, in WordPress, you kind of have these SEO standards. And they said, listen, we're not going to just base this off from these standards. And you write what you think is important. And so it's this great kind of opportunity at GamersWaypoint where we don't have too much hierarchy at all. Instead, we volunteer to write different articles and write different press releases and features. And that way they're not told what games they're going to write about, what they need to do. And instead, all that writing just comes out of people's desires. And I think that that startup, GamersWaypoint, has kind of found a mode to operate within that I think encourages better writing.
Yeah. One of the things that I saw recently, and I think this ties into what you were talking about with the different themes around mortality and human existence. I think a lot of us were kind of feeling those feelings when the pandemic first started and we were all kind of in lockdown and stuck within our homes. And I remember seeing a video that your startup put out about different destinations within games. And so allowing people to actually get out of their house and experience these really nice experiences within the games. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that was another content creator. She works mainly in video. It's Hannah. She that video was really, really cool, right? That there are these different ways that video games could be operating at. And like we were discussing earlier, it's not just about checking out. Video games have started to pay really close attention in recreating cities. So like Spider-Man and visiting all the different areas of New York, Assassin's Creed trying to recreate, and they do a lot of research in this, trying to recreate ancient cities. And this takes a lot of research. And just to have that window opened up. So, you know, you're stuck inside your house or you're stuck, in a situation where you don't really get to travel that much, video games aren't going to give you the true experience, but they're going to give you an experience that you may not actually get other times. And so it is about opening that world. Or one of my favorite games I accidentally discovered was Hellblade. And in this game, they tried to simulate schizophrenia. And so you are in an old Viking kind of priestess warrior lady, and they researched at Oxford, and they brought in people who suffered from the condition, and they really listened to their feedback. They'd give them demos, and they have these interviews after the game where the people are like, we've never felt like our experience has ever been represented out there. And to have other people learn what this experience is like, because you have these interesting audio hallucinations. There is panic that's brought on. You get to actually feel the panic. You have to play it with I forget what the term for it is, binaural, whatever it is for your headphones, where sound can come in both ways, to simulate the stress and anxiety that comes with not knowing exactly what is real and what's not in certain situations. And so there are a lot of opportunities, both in reviewing and in creation, to give humans a more complex experience where we can learn about each other, learn about other places, journey to those places. I think that's kind of the beautiful part right now of video games, exploring these opportunities where they're not so restricted on what they have to produce.
Really interesting. I'm curious to know a bit about your teaching experience, because one of the things we say about content is it can come in any, shape or form. I think teaching is a form of passing on content to others. Yeah. So, what drives you when you teach your students? Are there things that you try to instill in them or teach them now that you maybe didn't used to, that seems more important now?
Yeah, so I think, and I learned this from a few instructors back in college, that writing is an opportunity. So a lot of times, and I teach writing, and I know how boring writing can be. Right? I've written a lot of boring papers. I've had a lot of boring papers assigned to me. But especially in grad school, and I had some of these instructors in undergrad explain that writing isn't just this individual creation. It is a social construction, right? Where if you want good ideas, then you need to be out there reading and conversing with people, and then you can start writing with actual purpose. And that's what I try to explain to my students, is that sometimes whenever we're writing a paper, okay, what can I do to get an A on this paper? What can I do to meet these expectations of somebody else? And because of that, we write poorly, right? That we become boxed in, and we become bored with our own writing because we don't have any purpose integrated into it other than just to meet someone else's expectations. That never inspires people, just to meet someone else's expectations. It's a burden that we have instead. So I try to instill in my students to look deep, understand that your writing influences things, or it has the potential to influence things. You could influence me. That writing could be so powerful that you want to try to work on that paper more and get this turned into the public somehow. Write about events that mean something to you, because everything that we're doing somehow shapes the rest of history. And we can take the passive approach, or whenever we're in education and we're trying to learn to write, we can start writing about things that actually matter. But the only way that we can write with purpose is trying to understand what's going on in the world, and trying to understand people's pains, their tribulations that they're going through, how society works. Like, writing isn't simply writing an essay. Like, when I was so surprised in English studies, where I'd be in classes and I'm learning about things that I would never think about writing, right? So it would be, I always thought in English we were going to be studying, grammar, mechanics. And that rarely actually popped up in my English studies courses. Because I learned that English studies was actually just exploring, you know, this form and how humanity has interacted with it. And so I learned more about philosophy actually in English studies than I did in some of my philosophy courses. And then I started learning about postmodernism and gender and race and society and propaganda. And I'm reading about Noam Chomsky and concepts of empire. And those are the things that you start to read and you start to converse with people, and then you start to tie those connections to your own experience, and then something new can pop out, right? Because everybody comes from these subjective experiences, and a lot of times students don't value those. They think that their experience is an obstacle or it's a defining thing about them, and they don't think that their experience adds to the big world. They might understand that it adds maybe to their family or to their relationships, but that they are actually connected to this bigger political world, but they've become alienated from it. And so they don't think that their writing can have any influence on that. And so I ask students that whatever you write with purpose. You write with the intent to actually influence, to actually change and shape how this world thinks of itself and how it operates.
Yeah, that's really interesting. One of the things we say about meaningful content from our perspective is that it should be purposeful. So we didn't prompt you to say that, but it sounds like you hit that one perfectly. Yeah, we agree.
Yeah, I just remember I had a mentor, and I was taking one of his classes, and he had us read all of these works that were disconnected, or seemingly disconnected, like Plato and Shakespeare, Karl Marx, Thomas Jefferson, Machiavelli, Noam Chomsky, all these different people. And then you get this assignment that gives you, the prompt was like 2 pages long. Right? It's this huge prompt exploring what the scenario is, the context is. And then he says, okay, now try to resolve this. And this was a concept of justice. What would be the just act here? By connecting all of these writings together with your own experience, your own opinion, and then constructing a solution. And so everybody is going to tackle this differently, but then it made you connect to all these great thinkers, that you were part of this line of great thinkers. And I think that's what students and other writers need to know, is that you're not just writing to make money. You are part of humanity. So you're part of this long, you are the process of all these years of genes being passed down, and here you are part of this thing. And so how are you going to interact with it? You're an important part of it. What's next?
What else? I think I'm absorbing everything you said. Like, it's so fascinating to me. I just want to keep listening.
One thing that I've started to understand, I enjoy the academic essay. I enjoy that it's hard, right? That you have to slowly take it apart and try to figure out the puzzle, and everybody has these different ways of putting the puzzle back together. So I like reading people that seem like they're impossible to comprehend, because I think, again, it's like looking at a puzzle. However, that's me. And whenever students are in the writing classroom and we're assigning all these essays, I started to wonder, not every student is like me. And so how can we make writing important to them? Because they're not going to find this style important, because it's not going to be practical for them. But then you start watching, podcasts and, YouTube videos and these tutorials. And I think a lot of students believe that all of those things are unscripted. Not all of them are, right? A lot of these tutorials, people have written out, okay, what are we going to accomplish? What are we going to tie in here? And that's writing. And so what I started to do was show videos as a form of writing. So watch some like Patriot Act and say, okay, now picture this as an essay. Picture this as an argument that this individual's making. And then we started to integrate blog writing into the classroom. So that became like, normally whenever you're in a writing classroom and you get assigned essays, there's like a persuasive essay, an informative essay, all those things. So what we started doing is, okay, you're going to create, let's say, a blogger. You're going to use some type of blog software. And you're not going to turn these in the traditional way. You're going to send me links. And these links are open to your writing is open to the public. And this is going to change how you write, because now it's not some instructor that's just looking at your paper for points. And instead of grading these things hard, so as normally, I look at an essay and I'm writing questions into the margins and saying, okay, we need to change this here. Say, listen, in your blog, you pick a theme and you're going to connect that theme over a series of blogs, and you can write about anything that you want. And as long as you just meet the minimum standards of like length, you have to have a certain amount of hyperlinks that are embedded into words. You have to use different headers and look at the SEO. I'm not going to touch your language here, and just write about what you want. And I will have students struggle the entire semester through the essay portions of this thing. But when they get to blog writing, and I've seen students start talking about activism within sports, and then I notice, oh, well, they're in the athletic program. And maybe this, they didn't feel comfortable, inside of an essay discussing what they really wanted to talk about. Instead, they wrote, some essay over, social media is bad or something, something that's not that great. But in the blogs, they feel connected and they start writing about everything. Some of them aren't even like essay style. They're just writing about their food experiences. So enjoying Ethiopian food and then enjoying Moroccan food and all this kind of stuff, where others are writing reviews of films or writing reviews of games. And so this online writing, this connective writing, has allowed, I think, students to not just be a little bit more engaged in it, but get a little bit of experience that is practical. Because I always tell them, people make money this way, right? I don't make money writing essays. I mean, last time I published an essay, worked on that thing for like a year and got $200, right? It is hard work and not a lot of money coming in. But online, there are opportunities to actually make some money, maybe a little bit. And you can be doing this in college, and you can start this now. It doesn't matter what degree you're going for. And I think that that also kind of triggers some students that, okay, this is something that I can use now. I can start learning about how I'm supposed to write online, and this might bring in some income. And so I think English courses in general need to start thinking about how we shift the classroom. I don't want to get rid of the essay because I love it. I think that thing's important to understand research and to do all that kind of good stuff. But we also need to be integrating these other components. We need to update to the 21st century, where most of our students aren't going to be writing about how the themes of Plato's Republic connect to Cixous's feminism and different things like that. They need also some practical application of what they're doing.
Yeah, and something that's really interesting that struck me about what you said earlier, you said that good writing often doesn't come out of wanting to write to meet others' expectations, right? That can kind of degrade the output. However, in this blog writing assignment, the potential that others will read it seems like it kind of brought out their desire to connect to people, or it made the writing more personal for them in a way.
Right, because it's hard, we always talk about understanding your audience, and audiences are basically categories, right? Because you can never really know your individual audience, but they're categories. But in the classroom, they do get an individual audience. In the public forum, they have to think about an audience that is varied, that has diverse desires, and so you can't meet their individual expectations. You have to, there are things that you want to consider, like not alienating wide swaths of people and how you use language and all those things. But ultimately, now you're trying to meet an expectation of, can I produce an idea that other people can appreciate, instead of what are these exact codes that people are looking for, with commas and grammar and all that stuff. Now they're just looking to create an idea that people can enjoy, and that they are responsible for that idea. And they're responsible for what comes out of them. And I think that holds a different type of weight out there on the internet. And I think students always meet that bar, by the way. There's a theory, Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, that whenever you put students who are not achieving certain standards with students who are overachieving those standards, then the student that's underachieving will rise up to those standards. And so what I've always thought in the classroom is you never give people what they can, that you know that they can do at a base level. Instead, you do things that will challenge them, and students normally go up, right? They meet that bar. So, you put those expectations out there that, hey, you're gonna be writing online, you're responsible for this thing, and students, they do it. They take it seriously. And I think a lot of times we need to be putting more faith in students in that regards when it comes to writing.
And I think those are great approaches, and you're preparing these students for the real world, and the next generation of content writers are going to be creating more meaningful content.
Yeah, I wish all content creators sort of lived up to the standards and the expectations that you described here. I know I hope to, more so.
So Alex, one of the things that we like to say is that we get inspiration from unexpected places. So I think as we wrap up, I'd like to ask you, where do you find your inspiration?
So it's a hard thing to answer, right? Because I think you always have to keep your eyes open for everything that is interesting. Be interested in the world. But I think my inspiration comes from it's a lot more simple to get at. Most of my ideas, and I tell this to my students, come from my conversations with people around me. They don't pop up out of anywhere. It's not some lone genius sitting in a room and an idea comes out. It's me playing video games and being in party chat, and we're just, we're playing a game and we start discussing determinism and we start discussing politics. And you always have to have your eye out for that. All of those conversations are important that we have with people. So my inspiration always comes from the friends around me, the conversations I'm having with students. We have to be talking to each other, and you'd be surprised how many ideas start to percolate in your head whenever you're actually connecting with other human beings.
I love that. And I think, that's one of those things that Sarah and I get out of this podcast, is really getting to interview people like you and feel inspired ourselves. So thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate this conversation. I had a lot of fun talking about it. So thank you.
Same. Thank you.
I appreciate the invite.
All right. Until next time.